just write down what you want to see. I think that's my biggest advice.
But I'm more focused on uniting people.
She said to me, I never would have dreamed you are a writer.
If the normal works for you, great. If it doesn't, don't beat yourself up over it.
I think anybody can get the words on the page, but a real writer will know how to fix it.
I always kind of feel poverty and hunger nipping at my heels.
Realizing that I wasn't mad.
The one mistake people make when they're submitting things is submitting them too early.
And then my brain just went, you're going to write a book.
You put your heart and soul into a book.
This episode of Story of a Storyteller podcast, and my guest today is Halo Scott. Hi, Halo.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Not at all. I'm delighted to have you. Halo is the author of Edge of the Breach, which is the first in the Rift cycle or series. What did you call it?
Call it cycle, but call it whatever you want.
And Halo is also one of the founding members of Queer Indie, which another guest already, Mario Dell'Olio, was speaking about too. So first, for the beginning, I usually be like, oh, tell me about growing up and tell me about this. But instead, I'd like to start with a different question for you. I have read Edge of the Breach, and I want to know what is wrong with you.
What is it?
With the utmost respect, of course.
Thank you so much for reading and for reviewing. That came from depths I didn't know I had.
I'm glad you said that, because that's something I'm really I'm trying to like ascertain a small theme for each author, and that's kind of one I picked out for you, was because I've seen you in other interviews, I've heard you on other podcasts, I've spoken with you before simultaneously on other podcasts. So the person I've known online does not match the author that wrote the book, but we'll get into that. And anyone who's listening or watching doesn't know about the book, their eyebrows will be highly arched right now, wondering what's going on. So first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Halo. I during the day I'm a web developer, and at night I write. Perhaps that's why it's so dark. I like to eat lots of ice cream, go on runs, and watch really disturbing shows and stuff, and read a bunch of books. Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm pretty boring in person.
Sounds like a nice day. Ice cream, running, reading, writing. I mean, you know,
what else do you need?
Yeah, exactly. So why don't we kind of take a step back? Can you tell us a bit about your childhood, like where you grew up, are you in a big or small family, that kind of thing?
It's not a dark and destructive childhood by any means. I had a really
that's okay.
I had actually a really fairy tale childhood. My parents were absolutely lovely, and I have one younger sister who she says that I kind of was intense at times, but I don't know. I guess there was a really big emphasis on math and science in my household because my parents are engineers and developers. So it was always like, we were the nerdy family that would do like algebra at the dinner table. But there was also a really big like influence of reading. So I think in stories. So that was like a lot of fun. You know, like my dad doesn't really read that much, but he loves like Star Wars, Star Trek, as does my mom. And I think that really got me into just storytelling in general. You know, I don't like to kind of be like, oh, reading is better than movies or movies are better than reading. I think they're all, you just cross-pollinate and
Yeah.
do it all.
No, I totally agree. I there's one very small subset of people out there who they'll be like, I'll never read an ebook, you know, it has to be a physical thing. And then they are usually the same people that say audiobooks are not reading. And I'm just like, they're all stories. Like,
yes, yeah. I know, you're consuming that. I'm like, you know, hundreds of years ago, people weren't even literate and they got stories and stuff. And, you know, I think you get something from every media. So.
Yeah, exactly. If gun to your head, Star Wars or Star Trek?
God. Gun to my head, I would have to say Star Wars, but I would fight for Star Trek too. I mean, I think there's a lot more rage in Star Wars, which is maybe why I like it. You know, like Star Trek is, I think, this ideal, wonderful world where everyone's accepted, and that's like the world I want. But I feel like Star Wars is that grittier. Like I liked Anakin, you know, I thought he was cool, and that's probably not a good sign.
No, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Pod Racer Anakin was cool. He was cool.
Yeah, this could become a whole Star Wars episode. I think so.
Seriously.
let's sidestep that. So you said like film and stuff like that was really important in your house, and both your parents were Trekkies and Star Wars heads and all that. Was how much of a influence was there on like reading? Like, were your parents the kind of parents that were like reading to you every night, or was it kind of, if you want to read you can? Like what was reading treated like?
Oh no, I mean, it was like my so my mom grew up and she just like was at the library all the time. She read, I think she told me she literally read every book in the library, from like kids through adults when she was, because she loves to read, and she's such a voracious reader that, like I always joke, she reads a book in like an hour, but she like consumes it, she critically analyzes it, and I don't have that power.
Yeah.
But she would read to us every night. You know, my sister and I, starting with you know, just kind of picture books, obviously, and then moving on to chapter books. And I think she did that well into elementary school, so well into like probably through age 10, honestly. And then like my sister and I kind of had different interests. She's the more commercial one, so she didn't necessarily want to read the stuff that I was reading. But we always, like, I think that doing it from such an early age, doing it so often, really instilled in me just this love of story, this love of reading. And it feels weird. I mean, unfortunately now I can't always read before I go to bed, but it feels weird if I don't even, like, sometimes I'll literally read a paragraph just because I feel like I need that, you know, that routine at night.
Yeah. No, like if it's, that's the thing, if it's part of your routine, you know, any little break. And I get that. I have literally just read a page of a book before going to bed just because it feels wrong not to.
I'm like, I can't sleep without it.
I'm the same with brushing my teeth. If I can't, I can go to bed, even if I brush my teeth hours before bed and haven't eaten anything, I still need to brush it just before bed. Otherwise it just feels wrong.
Me too.
And what about, you said you and your sister had different, very different interests by the time you were at the end of elementary. So what were your favorite books or stories or films as an 11-year-old Halo?
11-year-old Halo. 11-year-old Halo was still intense. So when I was 9, episode 1 of Star Wars came out, and my cousin Adam was like, you have to see this movie. He's like a year older than I was, so about the same time. And I was like, yeah, I'll get around to it, whatever. And like every time, like at family parties, he's like, you have to see this movie, you have to see this movie. And I know there's some hate for the prequels, but for me, they're just, you know, they fulfill the need I needed at that time. And I watched the movie, and I was just like, this is so cool. I want to be a Jedi and pod race and do all this. So that got me on a whole just Star Wars, Ray Bradbury, Joe Haldeman, or maybe that was later, but like just everything kind of classic sci-fi, I guess, you know. And around the same time I discovered Star Trek, and that was like my nighttime routine. I would like watch an episode of Voyager, read a chapter of, like, it was usually the Star Wars like extended universe, and then like pass out and have, like, you know, science fiction dreams.
Okay, so science fiction was very much your jam then, like, as a
yeah. Well, fantasy too, with like Harry Potter, but I didn't really read. I don't think I really. It's hard because like I wasn't that into. This is gonna sound like blasphemy, but I wasn't that into Tolkien. There's nothing wrong with it. I read The Hobbit, and I couldn't get into it. I think it's a problem with me rather than a problem with the books. Like I like things to be a bit faster paced. I think that the world building is phenomenal, but you know, that's why I would say I tended more towards science fiction, because it was like Harry Potter and Star Wars, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, I think, around that.
Okay, yeah, I know your road now. I know.
You know my brand.
Yeah. So what about school? Was there much creativity? I don't want to say pushed on you, but like you know, was there any kind of moments you remember writing a story for English class or something, and you're like, hey, I liked this and I was quite good at it? Or were you the complete opposite?
So it's funny that you'd say that, because I was actually just going through a bunch of my childhood stories, and I wrote all the time. Like, my mom says that she remembers I would always bring stories home, but the reactions to them were not typical. Like, I had a few friends, a lot of my friends liked reading and liked writing, and they were more of the like kind of gentler stories. I don't know. Like, mine always kind of involved cheese. I don't know why. Like sentient cheese, like a sentient flock of cheese. I know that's the reaction I got. It was like, that was one of them. I don't know if you saw on Twitter, I posted, it was Billy the Blowfish. There were like these really weird, almost like, you know, Salvador Dali, like his painting style. That was like my writing. So yes, I wrote. I don't know if I was necessarily, like, my parents encouraged me. The teachers were more like, you were very original.
Original being a synonym for weird.
Yeah, I mean, that was what it was. And I was like, yeah, it's just, but I kept doing it, you know, and there were people, you know, God bless them, who did see it, and instead of judging, I mean, like, imagine, like, my mom just saw, like, you know, their daughter brought home this like story about cheese that was like kind of a mafia boss, and they were just like, good job, sweetheart. Keep writing. So, that one's not published.
I really want to read that.
It's horrible. I think I threw it away because I was like,
no. Oh no. You're reminding me of a book. I can't remember the name, but I can see the cover so clearly. My cousins had it, and I remember every time I went to their house, and like, I grew up in Leitrim and they're in Dublin, so it was a 3-hour drive, and it was like it was the Tales of the Stinky Cheese Man or something, and it was kind of a weird greenish kind of color of a cover, and the main character in the front, he had like the wheel of cheese was his head, and there was a slice cut out just beside his face, and the rest is just a normal-ish body, and he was just running across the cover.
You stole my idea.
Clearly, yeah. For a second I thought maybe you wrote it and you're just really early published author. So that's kind of like your childhood, and I can start to see already, and we will get to Edge of the Breach, don't worry, but I can start to see already the seeds being planted of your novel in your youth. So
the mafia cheese.
The mafia, yeah. I mean, like, see, gangs, it was there. I was kind of rooting through your website in preparation for this, and I saw that you mentioned you were a teacher, a musician, a photographer, a student, a coder. Like, you seem to have had so many different careers and interests and things like that. So can you just tell me a bit like that? Because for me, I finished secondary school, or high school, as you would say, went straight into college to do a teaching degree, and left college and started as a teacher. And I've been a teacher now for nearly 10 years. So like, for me, that seems so bizarre to have had so many careers. So can you tell me a bit about that?
I mean, like, I kind of say that I'm a Renaissance soul, but I would say more like, I guess the less kinder way is like, I was a jack of all trades, master of none. But yeah, I mean, I always liked to do a lot of different hobbies, and my parents always encouraged me to kind of try a lot of things out. And I think that as a writer, it's really important to kind of, you know, do different things, not necessarily obviously professionally, but like just having a lot of different hobbies. Having a dog probably gives you plenty of inspiration for, like, you know, coming up with stories. And I didn't really know I didn't know what direction I wanted to go in. I didn't realize that story was always kind of beneath it all, but I loved music. I majored in music. And I did a lot of music composition in college, which is what Evan, part of Queer Indie, talks about, like, because he was a professional dancer, much better than I was a music composer. But he talks about, like, creative structure and narrative structure. And it was cool, like, someone pointed out in my book, they're like, oh, you're kind of composing like parts of it in a more musical style, like you're using different motives, repeating them and stuff. And I didn't realize that until they pointed it out. And I thought that was really cool to be like, you know, like we were saying with story, like there's nothing different from if you watch movies, TV, books, whatever, like, you know, you're consuming story. So that kind of got that basis. Then after I taught a little bit. I'm not a good teacher. I admire teachers, love teachers so much. One of my really good friends is a teacher, and I just see how like our energy is just so different. And she's absolutely wonderful. And I was just like, I saw myself in the role. And this is, well, part of this time was when I got the kazoos for the students. And then I realized I was like, this isn't my path.
You should tell that story because it's a different story. People would have heard it.
Yeah. So I was a music director. This is around the same time that I was teaching, and a music director for a camp for the summer. I was like, great idea. I heard this song that had kazoos, which I don't know why. My sister found some weird stuff online. I was like, great, I'm going to give, and I had 6-year-olds to 10-year-olds. I'm like, I'm going to give them all kazoos. I was super excited. I went to the dollar store, picked up a ton of them. And I was like, guys, great idea, you know, handed them out, handed every kid 2 kazoos, actually, now that I remember. I don't know why. Like I said, yeah, it was horrible. It was terrible. And then I was like, okay, we're going to, I think it was, oh God, what song was it? Something like Row, Row, Row Your Boat. I was like, we're going to do a round with kazoos. And it might have been the most jarring thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, if you want to just like I don't cry easily, and I was close to tears. I'm like, this is just horrible. It's killing my ears. So I'm not really a teacher. Moral of the story is that it's not my calling. Love teachers. They're amazing. I need them every day, but I bow out of that.
I mentioned this to you the other day, but I teach a after school ukulele club in the school I work in, and we do a Christmas concert every year, and we raise money for charity, and we do it like in shopping centres. We did it once at the arrivals terminal at Dublin Airport, and that was really nice. But one year I was like, you know what we should do? We should get 4 kazoos and give it to like the really, really good kids who are just, we can rely on them and they won't mess, and they won't. No, like literally the best kids. And I wouldn't mind, but like the ukulele club are the kind of nerdy good kids anyway. So like that nerdiest, best behaved of the nerdiest, best behaved group of kids, and still it was just a disaster. So kazoos, I feel like they should come with an over 18 warning.
Oh no, the counselors too. I would say it turns anyone into a savage. Like, well, because you have to hum into it, and I think that's what like was so hard for me. And you know.
Yeah, you have to like talk into it really. Like it's more. I think it's more like not that I play it, but it's more like a trumpet. Like you don't blow into a trumpet. You kind of, I don't know.
You fart into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I played 2 kazoos at once, and that was a horrible sound too. But anyway, sorry. But yeah, so that taught me I shouldn't be a teacher. And then coding was something that they, like with music, it's so funny because like music majors, they have people come in who are like, you're probably not going to get paid for this, so let's think about an alternate job. So they said that like, you know, music composition goes really well with kind of coding and stuff. It's like that balance of art and science. And so, you know, hence the coding. And then I started kind of writing more seriously a few years ago to kind of have a
so that, yeah, that was going to be my next question. So while you were kind of learning about the dangers of kazoo playing and all that kind of thing, where was writing fitting into it? I mean, was Cheeseman Mafia kind of just a blip, or was that just a constant thing going on in the background?
It's so funny that you asked that, because I thought at first that I kind of wrote as a child and then I didn't, but I was going back through my computer and I was like, oh, I actually have written throughout. They just all were really terrible stories, but like I wrote throughout. And when I think it was when I was in grad school, I thought, you know what, I'm going to write a novel, and I wrote a full-length novel. It was really, really bad. It was about like someone who had like, it was like a brain transplant or something, but it wasn't like in a cool way. It was very weird. But I wrote it, and I think that was good for me to kind of see long form, because I had only done like Mafia Man short stories, Mafia Cheese rather.
Way
And then I just kept on writing more really crappy novels until I started kind of getting the hang of what wasn't working. And I think that's really kind of essential to see, like, why does this suck? And why isn't it work? You know, why does this suck? And why does the book that you're kind of reading work? And figuring that out. And also, I think breaking molds, like, in music theory, I love what they taught us. They're like, okay, here are the harmonic rules. Here are the rules of music theory. Here are the harmony rules. This is how voices need to move in relation to each other. You know, this is how you write it. Mozart didn't use any of these rules, but like, I mean, he'll use some. He's like, oh, he's breaking it here and breaking it here. So it's like, learn the language, learn grammar. Don't necessarily use it, but you have that in your arsenal. So I think that was important too, to be able to just kind of be like, screw it, I'll go off on my own way.
I remember vaguely, and you're kind of, it's to back you up here. I did art as a Leaving Cert subject, and I remember, like, we had a debate or discussion or something. I'm not even sure if it was in secondary school, but anyway, about abstract art and how, you know, how come some abstract art is so famous and popular, and then a 5-year-old's drawing, which you could theoretically say is abstract, doesn't. And it was this thing of, well, usually abstract artists are very good artists traditionally. Like, they will do the bowl of fruit, and they will do the nude painting of a person sitting on a stool, you know, and all that, and they'll be really good. And the reason for it is you have to really know and understand the rules before you can break them in a way that makes something work.
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, that's one thing you do really well in your novel, is you understand the rules of the fourth wall well enough, obviously from your love of so many different types of story, and you're just after saying you kind of cut your teeth writing a whole lot of crappy novels. I'm quoting them. I'm not calling them crappy. I'm quoting them.
They were.
And that's something that really caught me, because I've never read a book that I remember that broke the fourth wall. So tell us a little bit about, like, you kind of realize now you're kind of out of college, and you start flicking back and you start deciding, oh, you know what, I'm going to write a novel. So was that Edge of the Breach when you were in grad school, or was Edge of the Breach a bit later?
No, Edge of the Breach was actually last year I started writing it. Like, I was writing a different crappy novel, and I was like mid crappy novel, and I got this idea, and I was like, oh, that's a lot darker than, well, I guess I used to think that I wrote light fantasy, and then looking back through all of the kind of decapitations and murder, I guess it was light compared to Edge of the Breach, but
Okay.
it came later. You know, it's funny, just a quick aside, I didn't actually put this together. My sister, I said she was a more commercial one. She was very into musical theater. I am horrible at singing, acting, dancing. So I don't think I would have had that influence if not for her. And it was really cool because, like, that's where I think the reason I broke the fourth wall is because, like, I saw so many of her plays, and, you know, her friends, like, they're all in musical theater, and they would just turn to the audience. So for me, I think it kind of, that's why that's where, like I said, crossing streams, doing, it's important to kind of, I guess, fill your head with just a bunch of different media.
That's I think you use the phrase cross-pollination. I think that's really important, because, like, I always get mocked with certain friend circles for being really into video games, and yet video game stories, the really, really high quality AAA kind of narrative driven ones, have brought me closer to tears than some films or books or TV shows, because in those you're not watching the character, you are the character, and you're going through their struggles with them and stuff. Like, I recently finished The Last of Us Part 2. I don't know if you know of it or not, but, like, that's a phenomenal game, and it's really controversial because of certain narrative choices. And I was just thinking then, like, wow, it's brilliant, because the narrative choice they go for is done so much in novels, but it's never been done in games. So it's about this thing of you experience fourth wall breaks in loads of musical theater, but it's not really done that much in novels. So it's really cool to see that kind of spread, I suppose.
For me, I was like, it's obvious. Have you played Metal Gear Solid?
Of course.
Oh yeah, like my buddies were all into that, and I was like, I like video games, but I'm more into the kind of like Unreal Tournament, like shoot 'em up. Uh, but they put it on, and they're like, no, no, Haley, you have to watch this, and I was just like, you know, because I'm usually like, no, I don't want to, and then I end up loving it. But it was just what Hideo Kojima does is like, I don't know, those cutscenes too. There's one that's like 2 hours, so it is
Yeah.
like watching a movie.
Watching a movie while playing a video.
Yeah.
What was the first idea that sparked Edge of the Breach? You mentioned you had an idea halfway through another crappy novel. So what was the initial seed that became the novel?
I you know, it's funny because this sounds like more I don't know, more sophisticated than I am, but forgiveness was kind of the theme throughout. Like I saw a lot of people people can just write people off so quickly and be so, there's so much hate, you know, in the world right now. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna go off on that tangent, but I saw so much of that, and I was just like, you know what, what would happen if people could forgive? And then of course, doing everything way too far, I was like, okay, well, how far can you forgive? You know, what does that person have to do before you're just, you know, you're beyond the point of forgiveness? And then, you know, came kind of Kaider, but he wasn't as malicious as he became. Like he was more kind of like, he was like a kind of a softie that was like, you know, oh, you know, I want to do bad things, but I won't. And then I wrote his first chapter, and you know, I was just like, apparently I'm just killing everyone.
Yeah, seemingly. To give people a bit of context, could you give us just a quick, I won't say synopsis because I cannot highly recommend this book enough. But could you give us a little bit of a back of the book style introduction to the story before we talk a bit about it?
Sure, yeah. So it's a post-apocalyptic world where season of birth determines power. And basically there are these two kind of lost and mirrored souls, Kaider and Rune. And Rune primarily deals with a lot of grief. Kaider primarily deals with everything else. He has a lot going on, a lot of struggle. I mean, he comes from he comes from a really hard childhood, and he also has a lot of mental illnesses that he's struggling with. And he, aside from that, just, you know, he's really smart, and he doesn't necessarily see the reason for certain morality. So it's that kind of conflict also about, you know, why do you keep fighting? You know, why do you forgive? Why do you keep fighting? Why do you keep pushing forward? So very, very light and fluffy.
Very, very light and fluffy themes in a really violent, graphic,
Yeah.
intense world. But it's really cool. So like where do, because there's so many elements of this, but like, and I'm not going to be spoilery here, but there's so many elements of it. Like you mentioned there, the idea that what season you're born in determines the power that you have. But what I thought was a really cool element of it is when you're born in that season also kind of determines the strength of that power. So Kaider and Rune, and as well, this is something it's a tiny link to my book, but my book all centers around the winter solstice, which was when Rune was born. So Rune is like the strongest possible person of her power set because she was born at midnight on the winter solstice, and Kaider is the same with high noon of the summer solstice. And now I'm just gonna like sidebar as a fan of yours. Does that mean people born at the autumn and spring equinoxes, do they also, are they like really strong in their powers? Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that actually comes into play in book 2 through 4. So
okay,
good
cool.
call.
We'll get into that. Possibly.
Are you born at one of them?
No, I wasn't. I'm in the.
I know I would be very unpowerful.
When's your birthday? Are you like a peak power person? Are you?
Oh no, I'm April 5th, so.
Okay, yeah.
No.
16th. It's like it's
very mediocre.
And it's even worse. It's at the end of one of the seasons for me, so it's like I'd be just like, oh, eh.
We'd be very boring.
I just work at like some really boring job. Nothing to do with my powers. So yeah. Anyway, back to the actual question. So because there's also the fact that there's the powers. There's also the fact that it's set on Antarctica, but because Antarctica is the only livable, like in terms of climate, location in the world. And then there's the fact that there's a dimensional rift up in the sky, and it's so boring and blasé and normal that people forget it's there. Like, there's so many bizarre elements. Where do you get your ideas? Are they things that, like, it's a question I hate. Like, when people ask me, where'd you get the idea? I'm like, oh, I don't know.
I mean, I think like what we talked about before, I try to kind of read a lot, watch a lot of TV. I have a lot of friends into video games, so I'm kind of like there in the background seeing it for story elements. I just kind of wanted to put all of those things together because I thought it'd be cool. They're things I've always been interested in, and I was just like, hey, why don't I overload this with stuff? And you know, I always loved like ancient Greece, ancient Egypt and stuff. I was like, oh, let's kind of put that in. Let's do some portal stuff, and let's kind of make it like angry Jedis. And you know, I think it's just all, it's hard. It's like 30 years of influences kind of culminating into like, you know, one book. So it's hard to kind of, I wish I could be like, that's why, but it's just, you know, it's a lifetime of sci-fi and fantasy, really.
Yeah, I think that's, you hit the nail on the head, because another author I'm going to be interviewing, I was going through her website earlier before this interview, and one of the things her biggest piece of advice for someone who's thinking of writing is to read more. Like, not even to write every day, it's read more, because everything in your book is, to me, extremely original, but you could probably, if you were reading it again, be like, oh, that's from this and that's from that, because that's, I just finished recording the audiobook version of my novel, and as I was reading it out loud, I was stopping every now and then going, that's a line from Buffy, that's from this thing, that's from that video game. So
that's awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. I have no idea when it'll come out, because Audible just say, we're processing it, it may take 50 days, and you're like, oh great, yeah,
it may take a year.
Oh, it probably will. So now I'm going to get to, like, for me, this is the one question I really wanted to ask you. So we've talked about how your Edge of the Beach is quite dark, it's quite violent, there's a lot of sex in it as well, and it's not just like closing the bedroom door, it's like, no, you're there and you're describing it. So for me, I would be so hesitant to write something like that, because I'd be worried about like family members and stuff, and you said your mum reads an awful lot. So at any point while you were writing, was there any self-censorship going on? No, there clearly wasn't, but what I mean is, did you struggle with that in any way? Or
so like I said before, I'm kind of the odd duck of the family, so I think people kind of expect mafia cheese from me. But you know, it's funny, like the other books, the crappy books I wrote, did have a lot of censorship, and it was that total, like, they looked at each other in a certain way and then you fade to black. But I think the reason, I don't know, like I wanted to take a risk with this book. I wanted to take a bunch of risks. I kind of got to the point where I had written a lot, queried a lot, just rejections after rejections. I got like hundreds of rejections. And I was at the point where I was like, I won't swear, but like, F it. And I was like, I'm going to write whatever I want. I'm going to put in everything I want. Everyone's going to be angry. Everyone's going to be horny. And just, I kind of went with it. And, it's funny to me to see who picks up on kind of what. There's some people say the violence is too much. Some people say the sex is too much. But I think for me, they're kind of both parts of the same. People are trying to get a release in the world, you know, and it definitely, like, I think after the fact, like while I'm writing it, I feel like I got into such a zone and I was like, this is great, more sex, more blood, more this. And then after reading it, when some people like quote back, they're like, oh, I'm at this point in your book, and they'll like send me a screenshot. I'm like, oh God, did I actually write that? Oh yeah, I did. Oh, thank you for reading.
And I know exactly what you're talking about, because I actually did that. I actually screenshotted something from the Kindle app on my phone.
I'm like, he's so sassy. Not you, Kiter.
Yeah. Because that's something I find so interesting, that you can't, that because it's so strange and unusual to see that, especially from a first novel, I think, because I don't think Stephen King worries anymore about what people think of his writing. But then again, he's been writing for, how many books does he have? He probably has more books than I have years under me belt, you know. So I suppose that's what I'm saying. Like it's really refreshing to see a first novel take so many risks and risk the payoff as well.
Well, you're very kind. I mean, I think the thing is, it's not really like a first novel. I wrote a lot of really, really, really crappy stuff, novels before. And, thank you so much for reading. That's very kind of you. I think TT Banks is another member of Queer Indie, and she said that, you just kind of have to take risks, and it feels very uncomfortable, and you want to censor yourself. But I think when you try to, and I'm not necessarily telling everyone to like include a murderous psychopath in their book, but I think taking that risk, writing that sex scene, writing that murder scene, or even if it's something that is, it doesn't have to be that crazy. Maybe you write a scene at a diner, or you write a scene that's like a comedy scene that you didn't really think, because comedy is so hard, and just taking that risk going further, because I've seen the people who are like, oh, I'm really afraid. Can you read this? I think it sucks. I'll read it. I'm like, oh, this is your best chapter because you took that risk and you went out there. So I think, it's very rare for a risk not to pay off, as long as you kind of have the research behind it, backing it, and you read enough or watch enough, or, whatever your favorite media is.
That's a really good point as well, because I think like to use TV for an example, season 1 of Game of Thrones became so notorious because it took so many risks. Like there's so many, like if you ask somebody to name like their favorite film or moment or TV moment, it's going to be those huge risks that people take.
The Red Wedding and stuff,
Exactly.
Remember.
Or like Seven, What's in the Box, and Hold the Door again from Game of Thrones. Like there's so many moments that like, and I think that's the point, is that if you take those risks, the viewers or readers or gamers or whatever, that's what they're going to remember, because that's what's so unusual. There's another podcast that I listen to a lot, and I mentioned it in the first episode of this podcast, The Creative Penn, and it's by an author, Joanna Penn is her surname. It's like the best branding ever for a podcast name. And she mentions this theory a lot, and I just want to get your ideas on it, that people who write really dark stuff, so people who write very violent scenes and books and things like that, or that kind of thing, that being that dark is within everybody. Like we all, like there's never been a murder that wasn't committed by a person. You know what I mean? So everyone has that capability. And there's a theory that people who write scenes like that are usually,
like mine.
Yeah, are usually the most psychologically healthy people, because they purge that innate stuff in their books. Have you ever heard that? And being one of those people who are is purging that, like, do you agree, or what do you think?
I've heard like kind of variations of that before. I don't know if I'd call myself psychologically healthy, but I think that so like when I have something difficult happen in my life, I tend to let off the steam in different ways, generally murdering characters.
Okay.
But
I just put the word characters there.
I know, just generally murder. But so I think that for me, it might seem like I'm more volatile, but I'm kind of letting it go. Whereas I know some friends who they kind of bottle it up inside, and they they seem like that person who's not getting it out. They're not getting out any outlet, and then all of a sudden they just turn into this zombie and just start there's that epic blowout fight because they're not letting it out. So I definitely think it helps me in that way. I think, like you said, there's darkness inside of us all, and to pretend that we don't have it. I mean, part of the reason that I include eating and pooping and sleeping and sex and everything in my book is I'm just we all do it, and it's there's everyone just, and if you don't poop, then you're cranky probably, but you know, so like I never saw that in a book, and I always laugh at like these like sci-fi will do it all the time. They're like stuck in some place and they're like, oh my God, we're here for 16 hours. And they're, you know, and they're like, oh, what's happening to the food? I'm like, what's happening to the food? Where's the toilet? Where are you going to go? Like, you know, just these things. So, I mean, maybe it's just like a raunchy side of me, but I want something that, I guess it's hard, but like that just is like, we're humans, here's humanity. And it has like, there's probably not something you won't find in the book for that reason. But yeah, I do think it helps me blow off steam. I hope it makes me a better person. I don't know about that.
No, I think that's the point of the theory, isn't it? That like, I suppose psychologically well-adjusted is a really strong term, but I guess it's
one I don't deserve.
I did not say that. No, because that's one thing. Like I said it at the start. I can't remember if I said it on air or not. But like you are a very sunny, happy, chirpy person to talk to and to listen to when you're on podcasts and stuff. So it's just that's something I think is so interesting to have that big divide.
In my book, I'm like, die.
Yeah, it's the exact opposite. You mentioned earlier that Edge of the Breach got rejected and you were querying a lot, or did you query other novels that you'd written, or was Edge of the Breach the first one you queried? And
oh no, I queried many. Got tons.
Okay. Many of the crappy ones.
All the crappy ones.
And did you ever get any feedback on any of them for Edge of the Breach? Like, was any publisher just said no, or did they say no because?
One person wanted, they wanted a full manuscript request, and they read a few chapters and they're like, I don't think I realized how dark it was until I kind of read it back. But then again, I mean, different paths work for different people, you know. And I think all the other books, I was like, these are crappy, they shouldn't go anywhere, you're totally right. This one, I'm not even saying like, I'm not saying like, oh, I'm right or anything, but I was just like, this is a story that meant something to me. This is a story I wanted to fight for. And I'm like, if one other person reads it and connects and it means something to them, then I did my job. You know, that's all I really need to focus on, I think. And it's like a more humble approach. Before I was just like glory and honor. Yeah. And now I'm like, you know what, because I was like, oh, write another book. And I'm like, but this is the story I wanted to tell, for better or worse. And I'm the only one that reads it, at least I can say I did it, you know.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my favorite things about self-publishing and being an indie author, is that, you know, to get a book published by a traditional publisher is a great achievement, but it's somebody taking a risk on your work. So being an indie author, it's like you're not hurting anybody because it's just you. It's just you. You put out the book. Whereas if you're an author for maybe a small new publisher, you know, it's not just your book, it's also the cover design and the editor, and there's people whose wages need to be paid based on the sales of your book. So it's a weird tiny extra bit of pressure. So yeah, no, that's another thing I think is great about indie publishing, is that there will always be books in that segment of the world that you'll never find the other, because publishers won't take a chance. And if there's any publishers watching or listening, they should definitely contact Halo and take the chance.
I think, like you said, I try to look at, so I have some really close friends who are in business, and I try to look at it from their perspective too, because I think so many times as creatives, we're just like, take me, you know, fund me, use me. And I'm looking at it from their perspective, it's like, okay, my book is super dark, super queer, which puts it in a very small niche. Not that you need to like dark or queer stuff to want to like it, but it is in a publishing niche. And sadly, for as many as like wonderful people I've met online, it is still a minority. It is still something that's, you know, and that's why like I always hesitate to even promote my book as being queer, because I'm just like, well, I don't like to use it as that's not the only thing it is, you know. I'm just like, it happens to be. But as a publisher, what they do is they look at it and they're like, oh, that's LGBTQ, you know, and that's this. And we have our, so terrible, we have our quota this quarter of, you know, oh, nope, that's all the gays we'll let in or whatever. And you know, I guess I'm trying to look at it from their perspective too, and trying to be sympathetic to it is a business and they're putting their money on the line. You know, I'm not looking at it as like, oh, here's this big publishing house. It's like, no, that's the editor putting in hours of their work reading your book. And some books I've seen they like promote it, put so much backing behind it, and it fails. And that is the kind of thing. Whereas with self-publishing, what's nice is it's like the risk is only in time. You know, time is your risk. But other than that, you're not affecting other people, like you said. So if you publish, you do well, you can go on and stuff. So I do understand that the kind of, I don't know, maybe it's I tend to get hot-headed, but like the proving yourself part of it, the like battle, like, you know, the battle to the death, you know, win in the ring, and then, you know, see. But yeah, no, I think whatever works for you is what, you know, works for everyone. I like I said, I don't like to categorize. I like all stories, all media, all genres.
And it's funny you say that, because like when I bought your book and I started reading it, I knew that you categorized it as having LGBT people. It's an LGBT book, but I wouldn't. And I'm a member of the LGBTQ community, and yet when I read it, it like, to me it's not. But I guess that's the thing. Like, queer people, we will see queer as normal, and then we'll look at everything else. So like, whenever there was a same-sex sex scene in it, that didn't shock me. I was focused more on the violence.
You're like, that did shock me.
I was like, oh. So like, to me, your book is more a sci-fi fantasy meld that has violence in it. But I suppose then if there's people that aren't LGBTQ, that might kind of stand out a bit more. So it's interesting how like different people have different categorizations based on their frame of reference and where they're coming from.
Well, thank you. That means a lot to me, because I don't like to be the in your face kind of like, it's queer. And I wanted it to just like be normal, not like, you know, oh, here's the blonde sex scene, look out for that, you know. And I guess maybe being queer, as I read it, I didn't even realize how queer, like in the rest of the series, gets more so, because it's just like, I'm like, they're horny, they're people, whatever, you know. It's that. So that's why, you know, I'm glad that the science fantasy comes through first, and then the murder.
And it's funny because you just reminded me, when I published my book, one of my coworkers, he was reading it, and the only time he ever sent me a picture, or like he bought a paperback, so he was taking photos of quotes, and the only time he ever did that was when there was a same-sex kiss, and it was just a kiss in it, and it wasn't, you know, because there's a fair bit of violence in my book, and there's a fair bit of like twists and turns and stuff. It was none of them. It was that was the one thing he commented on.
Oh, that's so funny, because like I wouldn't even notice. Probably like people have said to me, oh, they're like, did you see the like gay sex scene or whatever? I was like, I remember sex. I don't know if it was gay or not. I don't know. That'd be like, do you know the straight sex scene? And what?
Yeah, that's a really good point. No two people would ever say that to each other. Like,
I always joke with my best friend who he's straight, and I like I said, I never like to be in your face or something, but I always just joke with him about like, you know, any time something seems like gay, I'll just be like, oh, well, that's my straight friend. That's my straight best friend.
I'm gonna steal that. So I suppose that's kind of like your beginnings and then your journey as a writer and everything. So now we're kind of more talking about your day-to-day, and you're now a published author. You mentioned, I know it's mad, you mentioned books 2 to 4 earlier, did you? So what's the status on them, and can I read them now, please?
You're very kind. I wrote, so I don't know, last year I wrote the series, all 4 books, and I edited book 1 because I don't know. Now I'm going back, and I'm actually probably 2/3 done editing book 2. I don't know what, like, I had a ton of filler words in book 2. I think I just like, I got really excited about some violent scenes, and now I'm trying to just cull it down, because like book 1, I don't think I added that many, but this one there's like a lot of just that's and are going to, and just whatever. And I'm just like going through trying to make it cleaner. There are definitely a few points I was just like, oh God, why did I write this? what did I do? But yeah, so I'm trying to edit that now, and we'll hopefully edit books 3 to 4 after that. I don't know how long it'll take me though, but
Okay, so you actually did. You wrote 4 books as like basically you did the first draft of all of them before you started editing book 1.
let me remember. I wrote book 1 and then I edited book 1 because I started sending it out to get rejected. And then while I was waiting, I know they usually say, you know, write something completely different while you're waiting on rejections, but I had a story. I basically outlined the first book, and only managed to do about like a fourth of that outline. I was like, oh, I accidentally outlined the series. So I wanted to kind of get it all down and to kind of see that arc at once and write it more like one really long, like George Martin length book. So I kind of, you know, I set myself a goal to just be like, you know what, I'm going to bang it out, write it, and just kind of go to town with that. And then marketing in the beginning of this year kind of took precedence over anything else. And now I'm getting back to editing, which is so very fun.
It's actually my favorite part of the process, and I know
Really?
I knew that was going to be the reaction, because whenever I talk to other writers about it, I always that's always what's said is, really, like, the first draft is my least favorite part of the whole process, because to me that's not the book. That's to me, writing is taking the first draft and making it better. The analogy I always use is like is like getting a block of marble. Like when it's a lot of work to mine that out of the ground, but then to carve it into the David, that's the real work. You know what I mean? So like that's the way I look at it. I look at it as the first draft is mining the story out of my head, and then the second draft is carving the block of marble into the finished product. So I don't know.
That's awesome. Well, it's so if I can just interrupt quickly, because it's so funny. I've heard so many people say that, and I think that's kind of the general, like, get it down, get the words down, and then go back and see what you're trying to say and stuff. It's so funny. I cannot, I've tried that before, and I just can't, like, words won't come until they're kind of ready, if that makes sense. So like I'll have a big period in the beginning. Maybe that's my drafting stage. Like I have these, I call them my brain diarrhea documents. They're just like so much. So they're literally named that in my drive. But surprise, surprise. But like they're just that, maybe, you know, I should really say that's kind of my first draft, but it is like, it doesn't make any sense. Like no one else would know what I was saying. It's just like Halo brain dropping is crazy. But that's where I do all the research, and that's where I'm just like, what is the message? Because before I start, I kind of need to be like, why are you writing this? Does this book even need to be written? Because a lot of my crappy books didn't need to be written. And, you know, kind of distilling that into something, because I tend to kind of go all over the place. But then that first draft, when I start writing it, I don't really change it too much. I do edit at night and I go back through, but I think, you know what, a lot of the drafting is taking place before in my head and in those crazy documents, so that when I say I hate, and I guess that is kind of editing, and I love that first draft, but when I say like editing now, it's like the line edits and the like, are you using the right kind of verb here? Are you doing this? Making sure you didn't misspell anything, typos, and literally just kind of peering through. And I read it aloud to myself, and I hate hearing myself talk because I just, and I want to like punch myself. So I'm like trying to, you know, so that's why it's like a violent, angry process that, you know, so line edits, I hate. Yeah.
Yeah. Like to me, that's not that, like to me, that's not the editing. That's the, like, I suppose that's the thing. It's just the different. Maybe I should stop saying editing. Maybe I should start saying like the second draft is my favorite part, because I also hate that, reading through it and being like, oh nope, I switched the IND and the word thief. Let's fix that. And where should the full stop be? He says, as a teacher, this is not a good look. So you mentioned that you're a coder, or not coder by day, or like IT worker, web developer, etc. Where do you find the time to write? Like, is your day job, as I like to call it, is your day job strict hours? Is it 9 to 5? Or can you weave in and out of your two careers?
It's a 9 to 5. So it's Generally, I have a half hour for lunch, so I tend to angrily edit. Lately, I've been angrily editing during lunch, which is great, and that just I know I'm just like and then usually at night I try to find some time to do it. So lately that's been kind of it's a bit all over the place. I wish I had more of a schedule, but I don't know. For me, I can be kind of obviously like very uptight, very tightly wound, very type A, and I think it's really good for me to not have that structure. Like for some people, they're like, I write the same time every day, and although, like I said, whatever works for you, do whatever you want. You can just say screw me if this doesn't. But for me, I'd like to actually do it at different times because I think it keeps me kind of on guard. It's like I'm not comparing myself to an Olympic gymnast by any means, but the Olympic gymnast is training. They can train every hour the same day, but when the Olympics kind of, occurs, you're probably not in your country, you're not in your element, you're not doing this. So I kind of view it, I'm like, if you can write any time of day, whenever, then, it's kind of training for something else. Or maybe I just don't have time, so I like to think that it's cool.
Well, no, I mean, like everyone's structure is really different. Like for me, if I don't start writing before 12, I'm not going to write that day. And that's like weekends and when I have time off school. But even that even applies when school is open and going ahead during the school term. Like I used to, when I was writing my books, I have to get up really early and write for an hour before I leave for work. Otherwise, I know when I get home that evening, nothing's going to be written. But I think that's the thing. It doesn't really matter as long as you can figure out how your structure works and then stick to your structure, or in your case, lack thereof.
Oh yeah, let me say I am not being prescriptive at
Oh,
all.
I know.
I'm not saying like this is what you should do. I say do whatever works for you, but realize what works for you might not be like typical. And I think that's why I had to realize, because for me, everything's atypical about me. But like I had to find what worked for me. So all I'm saying is that like if the normal works for you, great. If it doesn't, don't beat yourself up over it. Because I see so many people are just like, I can't write this way. I'm like, then don't write that way. Then do something else,
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think the thing is like for queer people, it's a bit easier to go against the grain or go against the norm because we are. So that's the thing, is like when the typical thing is write every day at the same time for this amount of time, and then somebody tries to pigeonhole themselves into that, it doesn't work. It's the same idea of the pantser and the planner, or the, as George R. R. Martin says, the architect and the gardener. Like I am an architect. I have to plan the book and I have to really think it out and line everything out, and I actually even have it down to the scene. And I actually tried the other way. I tried, let's just go over it, let's just type and see what happens. And I deleted a 30,000 word manuscript because I hated it so much from trying that process. So, the important thing is try different ways of writing and try different ways of creating your work, and then you'll end up with the way that works for you.
There's no right way. I mean, you just literally do whatever works for you. And I think it's interesting you mentioned being queer, because for me, I had a friend who, this is the same straight friend, and he was going through something. And the more he was talking about it, the more I'm like, well, it sounds like you're like coming out, like, not in the way that like you and I would think of it, but I'm just like, it's about coming out with a secret. It doesn't have to be that like you're gay, or whatever, or bi. But to me, that's kind of how I saw it. And I think being a minority, being different, like once you come out, you're just like, whatever, I'll do whatever I want. Nothing phases me anymore. Do it your own way, because that's kind of the whole thing. Do it your own way. Whereas I think for people who might not have that experience, it's important that they know too, oh no, you can do it your own way. Because I've heard people say like the opposite of what you just said. They're like, oh, I tried to plan it, hated it, threw it out, went right back to pantsing it. So it's really like just, I think people need to just trust their guts and realize that you might find a new method that works for you, and what works for one book might not work for another book, and that's okay. I think people can be so rigid and they get stuck with just like, why isn't this working again? It's like, well, you like certain things at 13, you're not going to like at 30, and that's fine.
Yeah.
You're going to hopefully you do things differently at 30 than you did at 13 too. So.
Wonderful. To bring us back to you and your journey as a writer, what has been your proudest moment of being a writer thus far?
I mean, the people I've met have probably been just, they've been amazing. I did have one person, I had a few people tell me who struggled with mental illness. Well, there was actually one review I got from someone, and she said, I like how you showed both the sufferer and the person who's trying to be the support. And how there can be flaws in each, because what I kind of saw, and I mean, I struggle with mental illness, is they kind of, people are afraid of touching that, and they're like, if you have a mental illness, like, you can never do anything wrong. And I'm like, no, I do plenty wrong. There are plenty of things I should be blamed about, and it's kind of separating that, what's like the depression talking and what's halo talking. And I think the fact that she kind of saw that in the book without me necessarily knowing that I was putting in it, because I've been on both sides. I've been like, oh, I've been the one who's struggling, I've been the one who's trying to support, and the frustration that can come with both is what I was trying to show. Because I guess my whole thing is just like, you have to find out what works for you. You have to just be open with it.
Yeah, and that's one thing came across in your book as well for me, was how both people are flawed, but both the supporter and the sufferer. I don't know if that's a good word to use or not, but you know what I mean. But not only that, but that the supporter, it's a struggle for the supporter to support as well. Like,
oh yeah,
and it's something that's it's really interesting, because it's not something that comes across a lot in certain genres of fiction.
Well, I've seen like the purpose is the mental illness, and it's not about like, it's hard for the person who's struggling to be like, I don't want to feel like a burden. And then the person who's trying to support to be like, this is, I can't do, like, this is outside of my kind of ability, and kind of just communicating about that. And just, I try not to offer any answers, just kind of offer experience. I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and it really comes across. It's really good. So then for the last section of the interview, so normally it's beginning, middle, end, but we're not doing end because that's a bit weird. So it's your to be continued. The first question is, when we said our goodbyes and hung up on this interview, what's the first thing you're going to do?
I'm going to have an ice cream sundae, actually. I sent a friend out for hot fudge, and that's my Saturday.
That sounds amazing.
I know. I'm so interested.
No, I'm being serious. I never make ice cream sundaes at home. It's like,
oh, you should. Sprinkles, whipped cream. Do it.
Yeah, I think I will. So then I feel like you've answered this already, but I'll ask in case there's others. What's your goal now as a writer? I'm assuming finish the Rift cycle, books 2 to 4, and eventually publish them and all that. But what's your kind of more 10 years time goals? Like, what's your real big, huge, I know 10 years. Everyone says, what's your 5-year plan? I'm like, no, I want 10.
10 years. It is, I feel like, on a personal note, I've tried to plan so many things in my life, and they've all gone to shit. So sorry, you can edit me out.
No.
But I found the best thing for me is to kind of be prepared for any eventuality, but to go with the flow. Because whenever I tried to hold on to anything that was like, no, this is where I'm gonna be a music major, I'm gonna be a do whatever, it didn't work out. And the fallout of holding on to something that wasn't right for me was really, really difficult. It was hard to kind of dig myself out of that hole. Whereas when I was just kind of like, I always say, like, I didn't plan on being gay. That happens, like, it's not like I was like, this is a great, I'm like, let's do this, and now I'm like very happy to be, but it's not something you necessarily as a kid like set for your 10-year plan. I'm gonna be gay in 10 years, but I don't know, hey, if it works for you, go for it. But so I guess I don't want to, I would love to finish the Rift cycle, edit it, publish it. I have a work in progress. I don't know if it's going to see the light of day, but it's been kind of it's more technical. I outlined more than I usually do, so I've been kind of angry at it, and I'll pick it up, go through it, and then throw it aside. So I don't know if I'll show that, but we'll see. I mean, like, dreaming really big, I'd love for it to get adapted to screen, but that's kind of a pipe dream, dreaming smaller, I'd love to go to conventions with all the people I've met online. So
They're all really nice dreams, so it's good. If it consider, because I didn't know you have a major in composing, when, and I use the word when the Riff Cycle is adapted to screen, would you be like, hey, can I help with the music a little bit, or would you just say no, that's someone else's job? Oh, okay, no.
What I've learned a lot, because I've seen, like, I work with a lot of clients, and what I see works the best is when you kind of let the professionals do their work. So for me, I guess, like, people put it really well. It's like, the book is my baby, and I can do whatever I want, kill whomever I want in it, and it's, that's it. Once it goes to screen, it's out of your hands. And, like, yes, I'd love to be able to consult to make sure they don't, like, tone it down, but in terms of, like, art and music and all that stuff, I think when you give people creative license, it works so much better, because I'm like, this is what you're trained for. There's the projects I love most are when, like, they give you guidelines, but then they're like, make it look good. I'm like, this is great, I'll code it and make it look how I want, versus the ones who are like, I can't name clients, but
Pretend it was me.
it's if it was you, and you were just like, do it this way, it's not the right way, it's against best practices, the site will probably break in a week, yada yada, and I'm like, okay, this is great, but, and they're like, we want to do it anyway, and then the site breaks in a week. I don't want to be in the other foot and kind of impose that on someone to be like, oh no, this is how clothing has to look, this is this. Like, try to keep the world building scarce and just be like, I don't know anything about clothes, do whatever the hell you want with I don't know, make it how you want.
Yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. Sorry, I'm losing track because I'm just so interested in all this that you're saying. This is the first time I've been knocked off course. So well done there. Do you have any goals that have nothing to do with writing?
Oh God. Figure
let
out my life.
Let me preface the implied part of that question. Do you have any goals that have nothing to do with writing that you would like to share?
They're like, let me edit myself. I would love to travel again. I have been missing it. I would love to go to Antarctica at some point. I'm not good with cold, so I'd probably be cranky, but I feel like it's something I need to do. I'd love to go back to Ireland, Scotland, just anywhere. I don't know, just I get like antsy when I don't just do something way outside of my comfort zone. So I feel like I like to do that, because I think as humans we tend to just be like, this is, see so many people are like, I turned, I don't know, 22 and this is what I'm doing for the next 30 years. And I just want to be like, I don't know, mess it up, make yourself uncomfortable, go and just, I loved when I lived in Scotland, like I didn't have a phone plan. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but like when I was wandering the city, I'm like, I might just disappear. And, it's just, that's what happens. It was great to like have to learn anything. Like, I don't know if I can't remember if they have this in Ireland, but you have to like turn on the outlets. And no one told me that. So I thought all of the outlets in the apartment were broken. And I spent literally an hour just plugging random stuff, because I was like, oh, maybe it's the adapter, maybe it's this stuff. But it's able that I found out after. But I loved it, because I was just like, that's the stuff that I feel is like real life. It's just like, I'm here. I can't like do anything. I can't turn on my computer to ask someone for like what I'm supposed to do, and just figuring stuff like that out, because it's so much more like a survival, And now for anyone, you have to turn on the outlet when you go to the UK. At least in Edinburgh you did.
Yeah, UK and Ireland, we have tiny little switches, light switches beside your plugs.
I loved it. It was great once I actually knew what it was.
It's really handy for like, the kind of anything that stays on standby, that sucks up power just by being on standby. That's what it's for. Instead of plugging it out, so much easier. Anyway, I didn't think we'd be talking about electrical engineering in this podcast, but hey.
Go with it.
Exactly. Last two questions then, Halo, and they're both fairly easy. Could you tell anyone watching or listening how to find you online and how to find your books and all that kind of a thing?
haloscott.com is my website, and it basically has all my info at halo_Scott on Twitter, Scott with 1 T. And yeah, I think I tend to put all my craziness in those two places mostly.
Yes.
And Amazon has the links, but I think there's an international link on my website. So it should direct you to your neighborhood Amazon.
Your local Amazon.
Your local Amazon.
And then final question, what was the last book you read?
I have not been able to read that much lately, which I hate, but I read, I think the last, I kind of co-read two. It was The Third Son by Victoria Price. She's a fellow indie author, absolutely amazing. And I also was reading Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, which is funny because like I saw a lot of like similarities between their work, and I hadn't like intended to like read those two together, but when I was just like, oh look, they like paired well together, like wine and chocolate. So you know. But yeah, no, highly recommend.
Brilliant. Halo, thank you so much for doing this. It was so much fun.
You.
And it's what I love about doing this podcast is I'm learning so much about people, but also learning about different ways of writing and looking at stuff. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a blast.
Not at all. See ya.